everybody. This is Elisa Chiu. I am the founder and CEO of Anchor Taiwan, also the co-host and curator for the session today. Anchor Taiwan is a platform focusing on ecosystem building and venture capital for cross-border innovation. It is with tremendous pleasure and honor to gather so many of you from around the world to talk about innovating with and within the traditional industries. This is our third Asia Venturing session. Every month, we invite industry leaders from both East and West to share, inspire, and connect. Previously, we talked about the corporate venturing and CVC landscape in Asia. We also explore cross-border opportunities around tech-driven mobility. You can find the recap and video replays throughout our social media channels. In the future, we will have more sessions about Asia's supply chain boosted innovation ecosystem, with some upcoming topics like how do global unicorns leverage Asia from zero to exit, and the new trends in the capital markets that founders and investors alike should be aware of. Today, we're going to explore the traditional industries, including the players you may or may not have heard of who are powering the world's economy behind the scenes. For example, in Malaysia, where one of our speakers, Rachel Lau, is from, there is the biggest disposable rubber gloves manufacturer in the world, Top Glove. In Taiwan, we have some of the world's biggest producers in screws, car parts, and bikes, among other things. A lot of these companies are sitting on tremendous cash balance while looking for partners for innovation. On the other hand, a lot of these companies also offer incredible investment opportunities with attractive profiles. If you know where to find them and how to work with them, you can open up a whole new world with possibilities of powerful partners or investors in Asia. Today, I am bringing together three speakers representing global brands, manufacturing giants, and capital markets. Did you know that Lululemon has a general manager sitting in Taiwan in charge of its global supply chain except the Americas? We will look into how Lululemon works with their Asian vendors and partners, and why Asia is crucial for its corporate innovation. From the manufacturing side, you might know the biggest bike manufacturer in the world, Giant Bicycle, or better yet, you might own one. In fact, if you have a Giant bike, or if you're like me, a die-hard fan of U-Bike, the bike sharing system that Giant runs here in Taiwan, tell us in the chat. On today's topic, how does Giant view M&A, ESG, and what suggestions do they have for startups? Last but not least, how can the next generations of traditional industries in Asia use capital markets to make an impact and be the bridge between external innovation and their family businesses? We have a prominent player from Southeast Asia, RHL Ventures, who takes family offices to a new play. These are some of the perspectives we will touch up on in today's fireside chat. We broke our record with the number of RSVP for today's session, by the way. Thank you so much for joining us today. I cannot wait to invite the interviewer and speakers to the stage shortly. The Asia Venturing series would not have been possible without our co-host and important partner, DIGITIMES. Before we start, I would like to invite Eric Huang, Vice President at DIGITIMES, to share a few insights on today's topic. Eric, over to you.
Thank you, Elisa. Greetings, everyone. Elisa, Richard, Rachel, Gulshan, and Marcel. Glad to have all of you join the webinar. I'm Eric Huang, Vice President of DIGITIMES. I'm responsible for DIGITIMES Asia and lead our research team to provide tech supply chain insight with an angle from Asia. Before the panel, I would like to share two interesting figures regarding to Asian traditional corporates. How significant is the traditional industry in Asia? To answer the question, DIGITIMES collects the year 2020 revenues of all these companies in Asia. We separate them into three industry sectors, namely tech, telecom plus media, and the non-TNT sectors. TNT industries are the highly tech-related industries under the digital convergence paradigm. Non-TNT industries thus can represent the traditional industry. In this figure, you can see non-TNT sector accounts for more than 88% of the total revenues in most of the Asian countries except South Korea and Taiwan. Thus, non-tech industries are the most important contributor to this country's economic growth. Taiwan is the special case in Asia, whose tech sector accounts for 60% of the total revenues of its public companies in 2020. Famous tech companies in Taiwan include the world's largest tech EMS provider Foxconn and the world's largest wafer foundry TSMC. Even with the dominance of the tech sector, Taiwan's non-tech sector is also competitive. For example, Taiwan's Giant is one of the world's best-known bike brands. Glad to have the Giant Marcel to join the panel. Also, Taiwan has very competitive textile industry to support world's most famous sportswear brands such as Lululemon to develop innovative products. That's why our panelist Gulshan chose to be located in Taiwan to mention Lululemon's supply chain of its global raw materials vendors except the Americas. Many companies in the Asia traditional industry are family businesses. PwC conducts global family business survey and publish report every year. This slide cites the survey result for year 2020. The left figure shows the extent of agility and adaptability of global family businesses. The Asian participants are less competent on their digital capabilities, while the resistance to embrace change is relatively higher compared with other global participants. Under this circumstance, Asian family businesses are still eager to pursue digital innovation and technology. Like the right figure shows, this option is the key priority only second to expansion and/or diversification. The score of Asian participants is comparable to the participants in North America. For example, our panelist Rachel used to manage a fund for her family capital. Now she mostly manages funds with institutional capitals. Their main investment is on food tech in order to solve Asian aging and healthcare resources problems. In brief, though corporate culture of individual firms may differ, Asian traditional industry faces the same geopolitical, economic, technological, and environmental challenges with their Western counterparts. It's important for them to innovate and transform as soon as possible for the new market opportunity and stay agile and sustainable. Now back to you, Elisa.
Thanks, Eric. Now, I would like to introduce the interviewer for the session today. For the Asia Venturing series, all of our interviewers are keynote and panel speakers themselves with tremendous industry experience. I first met the interviewer today, Richard Dasher, back in 2018 when I was invited to speak at Stanford University's U.S. Asia Tech Management Center, where Richard serves as the director and chief executive. Over the years, I have witnessed his expertise in advising governments, startups, business accelerators, corporates, and investors. He is fluent in Japanese. Konnichiwa, you can greet him with that. And he has worked globally, especially between the US and Asia. I'm so glad that finally I have an opportunity to bring him to our session and to be the conduit between the East and West, asking questions from his perspectives and joining the discussions. Richard, how is Silicon Valley treating you these days? And are you back on the Stanford campus?
Well, I'm going to campus about once a week now. But basically, Silicon Valley, the traffic is starting to get worse, so things are getting back to normal.
I definitely don't miss that. And I am so excited to finally have you at our session. I guess I will let you introduce our speakers. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Elisa. So we already have our first question. And the first question is about recording of this session and how it will be available. Elisa, can I confirm with you that you will take care of that and give people instructions later in the session?
For sure, I have your back. And the session indeed will be recorded and distributed afterwards.
Okay, thanks very much. And I want to thank the organizers of today's event, DIGITIMES and also Anchor Taiwan, for this great invitation. what an exciting panel we have today about a topic that's really important. I want to make a couple of comments up front. First of all, innovation is often misunderstood. Innovation is really about change. When you invent something, you're creating something new, but that's only the beginning of the process of innovation. The best definition of innovation that I've seen is that innovation is responding to some change around you or anticipating some change by creating new value. Value doesn't exist unless what you've invented is actually used. And value can also be created by eliminating some old way of doing things, especially in exchange for a better new way. So innovation is broad. It applies to business models, it applies to business practices, as well as to technologies and products. It's all about change. The second point is that we're in the middle of an era of incredibly great change. It's often called the fourth industrial revolution. What's happening, and I think this is reflected in Eric's comments about people in Asian industries feeling less confident about their digital capabilities, is that digital technologies are calling for change in all of the fundamental business relationships there are, whether it's company to customer or company to supplier or company to competitor. Also, as digital data and digital technologies continue to move into the cloud, where really there aren't borders, it calls on us to think about international business and global competition in new ways. Yes, of course, this is something that everybody worries about. And I really have to say the organizers have come up with an absolutely great panel for this. I want to introduce each speaker briefly, just give their name and job title, and then ask each speaker to give about 5 minutes of opening remarks about their story, how innovation has affected their company in the last 4 or 5 years, and maybe a little bit about what they really want to see from innovation in the future. So our first panelist, I'm going in alphabetical order, is Gulshan Kumar, who is the general manager of the Taiwan subsidiary of Lululemon. And our second panelist is Rachel Lau, who is the co-founder and managing partner of RHL Ventures. And our third and certainly not least speaker is Marcel Huang, who is special assistant to the CEO of Giant Bicycle. So let me ask Gulshan, if you'll start us off, tell us more about Lululemon, what it's like, and how innovation has affected you for the last 4 or 5 years.
Thank you, Richard, and good morning and good evening, everyone who is on this call from around the world. As Richard mentioned, my name is Gulshan, and as a general manager of Taiwan LLO, I'm responsible for managing supply chain, production, and quality management for all global raw material vendors except Americas. And for some of our audience, not from apparel or textile field, Lululemon is a technical, athletic apparel brand, designing gear for yoga, running, training, and everything in between. But we are more than just that. A little bit on my background, after graduating with majors in textiles from the Technological Institute of Textile and Sciences in India, I've been working in this apparels and textile sector for past 24 plus years. And throughout my career, I've worked with hundreds of key industry vendors globally, with at least the last 15 years residing in Hong Kong, Shanghai, and in Taipei. Prior to Lululemon, I had the fortune to work for PVH as Director Raw Materials, and at Puma as Group Head Raw Materials, managing a sourcing portfolio of approximately $300 million. Going back to, Richard, your question on how innovation has affected our company or our business, or what has been the biggest change in the last 5-10 years for our company, I would say as a company, our foundation is built entirely on innovation. That's how we started innovating and introducing yoga pants. and then gradually, through the power of innovation, we have been, expanding. And if you just look at the results, the Q2 results we announced last week, which was really, I would say, really re-emphasize our kind of belief in the power of innovation. And the biggest change that I've seen in the last 5 years, I would say, is our emphasis on tech and also on sustainable innovations. Thank you.
Thank you, Gulshan. Let's move right along, and let me ask Rachel, if you'll go next. From the standpoint of someone who's involved in investing, what sort of things has innovation done for your firm? Tell us more about RHL Ventures, if you would.
Sure. Thank you, Richard. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever everyone is. So RHL is a private investment firm. We do mostly venture capital at this point. We manage over 600 million AUM in the venture space. Essentially, the way that we've looked at innovation is changed, as you rightly pointed out. My background has been in hedge funds and investing in the public equity space. And basically, over the years, we've seen a change in the way people have invested, the way that corporates have innovated, and the people who have invested in growth have been the ones that have moved forward from times of today, in a sense that they've weathered COVID a lot better than the rest of the people. And I think that's the most timely example at this point. They've stayed more relevant than anyone else. And also, as Elisa has rightly pointed out, it then comes with being rewarded in terms of share prices. Coming back to myself, again, I was in New York, Australia, in Hong Kong, working as a fund manager, investing in public equities and emerging market debt. I came back in 2017 to start RHL Ventures with the view that while the U.S. and North Asia was growing significantly, we saw Southeast Asia growing much faster than the rest of the world. Mostly because of a couple of things, right? We had great talent coming back to Southeast Asia. In Chinese is Haigui. Coming back to Southeast Asia. With the existing talents that they had and with the experience that they had, there's more capital coming into Southeast Asia. But also at the same time, you've got a young, vibrant demographic of citizens coming up. And, one thing that consumerism and consumption that we've never seen around the world besides in China and India. And so, the thesis was obviously leveraging the change of times, but also the innovation of technology that plays a part in everyday's life. And so again, we've invested mostly in Southeast Asia. We used to do the US, and then now I think we're predominantly focused on Southeast Asia. We look at food tech a lot, and that's something that, food security, healthcare, insurance, the things that are very typical day-to-day things that touches our lives.
Thanks, Rachel. That's a great opening. I'm going to keep moving right along and ask Marcel if you'll tell us a little bit about Giant Bicycle and, what is innovation to Giant?
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So a little bit about Giant Bicycles. We are the largest high-quality bicycle manufacturer in the world. We have, over the span of about 5 decades, we're approaching 50 years old. And we have expanded to a global footprint of manufacturing, sales, and distribution. So we are really a global full value chain company that serves the cycling needs of people worldwide. So in terms of innovation within Giant, what's gotten us so far, it's been incremental improvements. We've met challenges along the way over the previous decades, and it's always been that problem solving step by step, and that's a really important trait and value of innovation at Giant from a historical perspective. And that goes back to Richard, your point about innovation being just problem solving and making changes to business models, to technology, to service models, all of that. In terms of the impact that we see in the past 5 to 10 years, there's been several, looking back, several things and concepts that have taken the headline, things like the sharing economy, e-bikes and IoT, even the home exercise movement that's been galvanized by the COVID lockdowns. All of these things are really big headlines, but I would really say some of the things that Giant have really taken a step forward in response in these times of change. One being the sharing economy. You know, people still probably remember the whole bike share boom of several years ago. Giant has made a play into this space, but in a very specific manner. Elisa, in her opening, mentioned U-Bike, and that's been Giant's play. We position it as a public-private partnership between Giant as an operator and equipment provider, as well as local governments as our on-the-ground partner in terms of promotion and making sure the infrastructure is there. So for us, it's really about serving the public need for that last mile transportation. So if you were anybody that's outside of the US, were to visit Taipei, and you're taking our MRT subway system to get across town, get out of the station, there's more than likely a U-Bike station with bikes available on the spot. And there's likely to be an empty station for you to return the bike at your intended destination. So it's that very simple promise of bikes where you need it, stations where you're going. And that's the core sort of promise that Giant is focusing on in response to the whole sharing economy space. And so, you know, for me and for us at Giant, we're really happy to see the popularity of U-Bike in Taiwan, serving millions of last mile transportation every month. And we've seen this kind of change in the character of each city where this has been in. You know, streets are becoming safer, the air is cleaner, and especially the old and neglected neighborhoods are revitalized. So that's kind of one concrete example of how, you know, Giant has looked at changes in trends and responded to them in a way that's sustainable and good for the public and us in the long term. Now, looking into the future, probably the biggest theme for innovation at Giant is going to be ESG. And that kind of echoes, Gulshan, your comment about sustainability. That's on our mind as well. Bicycles are taken as symbols of that green world, sustainable living sort of concept. And we'd really like to deliver on it in a very concrete way. So we're looking for the next wave of innovations, teams, partners to help us realize that sustainable concept for bicycles from an industry perspective overall.
Okay, thank you very much, Marcel. I want to kind of do sort of a heads up on the format for this afternoon. We're going to be discussing among each other for a while. There are some things that we think are important to get out to everybody. We're paying questions. I noticed that Elisa just went through the A box and said that everything's been answered. I have taken notes on these questions. We'll come back to some of them as we go along. And especially the company-specific questions we'll do a little bit later. But I want to go around with all of our panelists now and ask a question that's basically maybe the toughest one in the afternoon. What's hard about innovation in your organization? Why is it difficult to innovate in your industry and in your company? Gulshan, what would you say to that?
I would say, Richard, for any innovation to succeed, I think what we realize is there are a couple of points, that we also advise internally as well as externally to our vendor partners as well. Is don't be afraid to take risks, or embrace the failure, and be have patience because these things take time. Like we always start small, we test, we iterate, and then we grow it into a fully commercialized product. So it's all about that mindset of embracing the failures, taking the risk, and be clear that as a vendor as well, that you are aligned with your customers' long-term vision. And then once you are fully aligned, I think it's a win-win situation, not just for the vendors, but also for big corporations like us.
So it's interesting psychological issues, fear of failure or unwillingness to take risk, or even just not wanting to wait until you can really accomplish something. You see any ways around those?
Yes, for sure. As I said, when we select vendors, just very interesting, I would like to share here is we spend a lot of time, building those relationship and connections first, just trying and understanding each other, sharing each other philosophy, understanding each other businesses, models. And once we are clear that these are the startups or the SMEs that we should be investing in, then it's all about just giving that enough time. So we have dedicated resources both internally, and we also have vendor partners who have been strategic enough to have those resources at hand, just to be working with us on all those innovation ideas and developments. This is what I always suggest any new startups or any new SMEs or traditional companies. Textiles is one of the largest traditional industry in the world. So we get to deal with this day in, day out. So yeah, as I mentioned again, just having clarity on the vision, just having clarity to your point, like what innovation can bring into your business model, not just your customer, but your business model as well. And once that is clear, I think it's a win-win situation for both parties.
That's great. Thank you. We'll come back to the special role of working with startup companies and SMEs. That's a really good point. That's really kind of my next big round of questions. Rachel, from the standpoint of financial industries, what do you see as the biggest barriers to innovation, either in the industry itself or in the portfolio companies you're working with?
I'd say we invest in startups. So we're all, very for change, because the whole idea is to disrupt the existing businesses and the way, existing businesses do business, right? I say financial industries have been hampered by over-regulations, and you see more regulations coming in. And I think with regulations, it stifles growth. There's no better way to put this. And so when you see the fintech companies coming up, it's very basic things, right? I'm sure everyone here has had the issues of going to the bank, changing a password, calling the bankers to figure out, how to do a money transfer. These things are very basic stuff. The e-wallets, for example, now we can go down. You don't have to bring cash. I heard I'd say he's probably about 70-year-old. He was telling of this little vendor, and he said, when are you going to get like an e-wallet? Because, having cash these days, it's not safe. I don't want to touch your cash. And so I think there's a mindset change. I wanted to touch a little bit on what you said just now, what's the biggest resistance? It was really, the mindset change of the older generation. But, even they are adapting to, change right now because, it's safer not to touch the cash, for example. My mother says, why do you want to go out and pick up groceries when you can order online? I think this would have never happened if COVID never happened. So, despite everything, I think COVID was a big accelerator for change. Companies needed to innovate, to stay relevant, to stay in front of their customers. And I think that would stay true in the next couple of decades. I think consumer behaviors have changed. People don't want to go out the way they used to go out. There's also convenience factors. The groceries are delivered to your door. You get a lot more selection than your typical grocery stores, for example. Now mom goes and have a look at, different sites, that was never typically available to her because she never ventured out of her typical, comfort grocery stores, right? And so I think if you look at it from that standpoint, change is here and change is here to happen. And again, just back to your point on financials, whether or not they change is here. And so if they don't change, if the banks don't change, and if governments don't change, the fintech companies will take over them.
Thanks, Rachel. That's great for now. Marcel, I want to ask, what's difficult about innovation in a major, product manufacturer? And also, what kind of special problems were there in setting up Ubike?
Thank you, Richard. I think when we go back to looking at innovation as simply change and problem solving, I would say innovation occurs on a daily basis at Giant, especially in our manufacturing side of things, because we always run into problems and we always have to solve them. And what I've observed, because I did spend a period of time on the factory floor to get a feel for things, I would say innovation, broadly speaking, they tend to fall into those two categories, right? One is being the incremental evolutionary process improvement. How do you make what you're doing now better? How do you serve your current customers better? And then on the other hand, you have those discontinuous, disruptive innovations where the keywords of we're going to upend or revamp or replace a process or a product or a channel come into play. And I think these two things have to be looked at very differently. And and as a company, we need both. If I strictly look at the traditional manufacturing perspective, I would say we're not too bad at the incremental evolutionary types of innovation. We've been using the Toyota method for a good number of years, and that's the driving force. And it's interesting because anybody with that mindset, when we pitch, especially the younger generations, when we're pitching brand new ideas, the burning question from the managers, from the more experienced team is always, well, are you innovating for better or for worse? Because what they're thinking is we're a full value chain company and there's no room to externalize any downsides. And so what ends up happening is we have this kind of dichotomy of really robust and energetic young group of people that's just throwing idea after idea, but then a really tight filter through which these ideas have to get kind of refined and sharpened. And so in order to let these two things kind of coexist, we've done a little bit of an internal organizational innovation in creating a new subsidiary called Advanced Intelligent Products, or AIPS technologies for short. And they're tasked with just developing and bringing tech-enabled cycling products to our consumers. So because it is a brand new business unit and insulated from our core operations, they are much more free to engage with a wide spectrum of startups and teams, anywhere from material sciences, production technology, all the way to artificial intelligence algorithms. So we kind of have to create environments for both types of innovations to thrive.
Can I follow up and ask, what's the relationships like between AIPS and headquarters? How, because I can easily imagine that they might see things moving at a different speed.
Certainly, and it is the intention for us to be able to have different units move at different speeds in order to catch different opportunities. And the relationship has to be connected at a very high level. If we're still looking at, hey, let's work on an operations level, even your day-to-day kind of pace, how quickly do I expect a change to take place? Even that cadence is different.
Okay. So you're expecting the change and managing it is just a fact of life.
Exactly.
Or expecting the difference in speed. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Kind of one thing that's coming out in this is the context in which everybody's doing business, especially the context of lots of startup companies, lots of incredibly rapid growth markets in Asia. Gulshan, when Lululemon is considering a new startup company, a new partnership, what are the kind of things that you would like to tell the startup company to keep in mind?
As I mentioned earlier, Richard, any new innovation ideas takes time to develop because there are rounds of iterations from seeds to scale. The best advice I give to startups is, number one, prioritize the companies that are serious about investing in you, and number two, as I mentioned earlier, is to have patience. I think these are the two most I would say the best advices that I give to startups, and not try to turn every conversation into one about investment. If you can solve, as a startup, if you can solve real pain points for the large corporates, you will build far more value for your business. And then investment conversations become a natural progression. And when done correctly, these collaborations can be mutually beneficial and can help both parties gain a competitive advantage and ensure long-term successes.
So I think that a lot of startup companies, their time is measured by the length of their runway. And they're really worried about a long negotiation process before they could ever even think about revenue. What takes the time? What's going on? How can they most efficiently use that time, and what should they plan for?
I think it's just to eliminate, before we launch any product, we call different kind of test readiness levels, TRL levels. So it can be anywhere between 1 to 9, depending on that idea and at what stage that idea is brought to us or from us to the startups. So we would not launch any product unless that has gone through all this level 1 to level 9 kind of, like test and learn kind of trials, testings and iteration and reiteration and then beta trials. So that is what, as I mentioned earlier, whenever we start a discussion with a startup, we'll take them through the whole process first. We'll just gauge each other kind of philosophy and understand whether both of us has that time, and patience to invest into this technology, which can be the next big franchisee. I'll just like to quote some examples here, like when we were looking to develop the next, kind of wear more, wash less kind of product, which doesn't stink. You can continue to wear even after extensive running or any extensive sweat activity, sweat after sweat. We brought that idea to some of our vendors. And as I mentioned earlier, the power of co-creation, this was a unique example where not just a tier 3 vendor, which is a yarn supplier for us, tier 2 vendors, which is a fabric supplier for us, and tier 1, which is like a finished good vendors, and also a machinery supplier. So it was kind of a co-creation idea where 5 of us, got together, and it took a lot of iteration and time to build it into a next, you can say, a big franchisee. A lot of you who are familiar with our products, if you can go to our stores, and if you must have bought a metal Ventec, tee, that is what I'm talking about. So just the point is, like, it takes time. It requires a lot of patience to build into something big. And that's what, the advice is always to the startups.
So you used a word there that I think is a really important word these days, co-creation. There's so much rolled up inside that word, though, that almost requires trust in advance before you can start to co-create something. How do you really see what is co-creation, and how is that different from just supplying something?
It's a good question, Richard. So, like, as I mentioned earlier, I'm very passionate about co-creation and the power of co-creation, the possibilities of co-creation, right? So for me, co-creation is when both parties, or it's 3 parties or 4 parties involved in that, are coming to a table, sharing ideas, sharing vision, aligning on those and then working together on those. So that's the power of co-creation. And as our business is growing, we feel very strong about co-creation, because we have seen the success of some of those ideas in our recent past. And based on that success, we feel even more confident now that we should continue this path and build a strong, you can say, pool of ecosystem of startups, SMEs, traditional players, and whatnot.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, let me ask you now, as a venture capitalist, people expect you to be investing in startup companies, but you obviously have to deal with companies in the B2B space. Do you have any kind of special things that you're looking for, especially with the companies that might fit into a supply chain, be a B2B kind of play?
So when we look at startups, I think we're a little more sector agnostic. I think the idea is obviously to leverage off the large consumer base in Southeast Asia. And so even if it's B2B, it's B2B to C really. So we've also experienced difficulties working with the bricks and mortar, I wouldn't say bricks and mortars, but also the older traditional businesses, right? So it hasn't been easy trying to sell to the B2B consumers. I say things are changing a little bit. We've got, for example, an insurtech company called Health Metrics. I think and the idea is to provide insurance cheaper for companies. I'd say if we went in and say, hey, we're going to charge you X amount of dollars to get insurance for your people, I think that would be a tough conversation to have. Instead we've said like, hey, we know that you pay 12 times of insurance for every employee that comes to the door, but in reality is your employee base, the average age is 29 years old. So the average 29 years old doesn't go to a hospital or clinic, a year, right? That or like they've got other issues. And so, we've realized out of all the stats that, we've done, and also when looking at all the insurance companies, really, you go to 4 to 5 times a year. I think that's probably what we would, the amount of times we would go to a doctor anyway, or a GP. And so we said, hey, instead of you paying for 12 times, we're going to charge you 5 times. And then that's an instant conversation, right? Because now I don't have to pay for the 7 times, right? Which I already had to pay. So the underwriting is a little bit smarter. It saves money, and when it saves money and it's really, dollar and cents going down to the bottom line, every conversation is very easy. The other conversation that, we've had is, mental health. Again, I touch back again a lot on COVID because it's so relevant. We've realized a lot of people had a lot of mental issues, not because of anything else, but the stress of being cooped up at home, the extra workload from the non-distinction of work time, leisure time, home time. So corporates now have embraced to say, look, we might not be able to be there for you, but hey, here's a solution that helps you monitor your mental health. I think that's extremely important, and corporates have started embracing them. Another thing, on the B2B space is, we've looked at supply chain procurement. I've talked to Marcel on the side a lot on supply chain issues. I'm on the board of GNC, and last year when we saw this COVID happening, the biggest issue was the disruption of supply chain. Supplements couldn't go from the US to the rest of the world. We didn't have enough of raw materials from the rest of the world going to the US manufacturing plants. We had a standstill in terms of from factories to retail stores. Retail stores couldn't get their products to the hands of consumers. So we saw a big issue on the supply chain. But in Southeast Asia, it was actually predominantly your day-to-day stuff, right? The farmers couldn't deliver their goods to the supermarkets. The supermarkets didn't have enough stock to sell to the consumers, and the consumers were left with more expensive, less quality produce. Whereas you saw farmers throwing away their produce because they were perishables. And so we've invested heavily on this food supply chain because of that. Getting fresh produce consumers from the most vulnerable farmers to the hands of consumers, and also, to be fair, a lot of ways bypassing the traditional retailers, and so cutting down the middleman and increasing the margins for the farmers, and of course decreasing the cost to the consumers. So I think we invest quite a bit in the B2B2C space, but I think that's also the most relevant thing at this current juncture.
So Rachel, I also want to thank you for giving a case study of exactly what we were talking about with the definition of innovation. Here's change going on around us, right? Like COVID-19 and shutting down supply chains. Your company saw that as an opportunity to invest in innovation. So I think that's neat. I have a follow-up question that really takes us to one of my last 2 points that I want to get everybody's opinion on. And that is sustainability and ESG kind of considerations. Is that another change that's having an impact on your investment philosophy or strategy?
I think
Rachel, for you first.
Sure. For us, it matters. It's always mattered. I think if you do good, you will do well. And I think it's really as simple as that, right? Our motto or our vision in RHL is to support the people who never had the privilege I guess, in a less better way, the less fortunate, or giving privileges to everybody to innovate and to change. And like the way we see it, for example, G Life, the conversation that we had just now on food procurement, it's really to embolden younger farmers, less fortunate farmers who don't understand how to get to the consumers, right? And there's usually typical. So in Malaysia, for example, for a farmer, there's probably like 5 middlemen before you go to a retailer, and after the retailer, there's another two middlemen that gets in the way before you get to the consumer, kind of thing. That's typical of Southeast Asia. In Indonesia, there's usually 9 to 11 middlemen in between, farmers to consumers. I think the way that we're looking at it is obviously, to shorten that gap in terms of delivery time, increase consumer satisfaction, but also, decrease carbon footprint, and therefore sustainability. But also, at the same time to, give back to the environment around us, right? And I think the stakeholders, the little mom and pops that never had that opportunity, you see that having the opportunity right now in Indonesia. It's really the smaller guys that are benefiting from this tech boom. They typically couldn't reach if you're in Bandung and you're selling, crafts, right? They weren't able to reach the guys in Jakarta or even the US. Now with Tokopedia, for example, you can put your things online and then it reaches consumers overseas. And it really is just putting it a stamp and an envelope inside and kind of just shipping it overseas, right? And then, there's significant margins. And so I think for us, it's, helping the people around us. And that's, again, a thematic that, we've seen being able to be done because the technological advances around us.
Okay, thank you. Marcel, one of the things that people used to talk about with bike sharing and that kind of thing is that was a contribution to sustainability. Besides Giant, what kind of innovations are you doing around the whole area of sustainability and ESG?
Well, that's a really big question, Richard, and I'm glad you asked. Yeah. I think for Giant, the ESG play, first of all, really focuses on the environmental element. We mentioned the concept of bike sharing was supposed to galvanize this kind of more green lifestyle. And then we see bicycle graveyards, right? When we go back to what are we externalizing somehow? So we're being very deliberate in evaluating and putting together an all-around strategy in terms of, dare I say, circular economy. That's like such a big dream. But really, at the end of the day, are we really creating value for the environment as a whole? Again, back to the not externalizing anything. As an industry and even as a society, we see, decades, centuries of building up supply chain in one direction. how long is it going to take us to build one in the reverse direction? Is it even possible? I think these are the central thoughts and innovation that we're really looking into. And I think with COVID and how over the past year or so, we see the pandemic really upending some of the fundamental business assumptions that we've been making, such as usually supply greater than demand, economies are built that way, businesses end up assuming that. Logistics used to be very smooth. That assumption's been upended as well. And so all of these friction kind of challenges us to really rethink all of these elements. And we're seeking opportunity to see, is this a time for change for the long term? And is there an ESG kind of element that we could weave in?
Okay, thank you. I think that this too is the changes happening all around us. We have to be able to deal with it some way. And really innovation is one of the main ways we can get through this sort of era.
Absolutely.
Gulshan, let me ask you, we had a question a little bit earlier that was specifically about microfibers that might be caused by synthetic fabrics. What kind of investments or activities related to sustainability and ESG innovation is Lululemon involved with?
Great question again, Richard, and very, you can say, close to the work that we have been involved in recently. We strongly believe that sourcing more sustainable raw materials is one of the most significant ways that we as a company can make positive impact globally. So what we are doing is we are building a foundation in this area by prioritizing issues and opportunities, like microfiber is one for sure, and taking steps to understand where our biggest impacts and opportunities live. We are also taking steps to trace where and how our key raw materials are sourced to improve the visibility, deeper into our supply chain. I would also like to quote a couple of examples, which was in the news recently as well. Like few weeks ago, we announced our collaboration with a biotech startup called LensaTech to create the first fabric using recycled carbon emissions.
Wow.
Yeah. So we know, Richard, that sustainable innovations will play a key role in the future of retail and apparel, and we are excited to be at the forefront of an innovative technology like this from LensaTech. Also, another example, just a few weeks ago, also we announced a multi-year collaboration with sustainable materials leader Genomatica to bring renewably sourced bio-based materials into Lululemon product. So this represents our first ever equity investment in a sustainable materials company. And for Genomatica, it was their largest partnership within the retail industry. So together, the two companies will create a lower impact plant-based nylon to replace conventional nylon, which is the largest volume of synthetic materials currently used to make our products. So just a couple of examples to highlight that how focused we are in terms of bringing sustainable innovations at the forefront and lead to a better carbon footprint on our products and in raw materials.
Those also sound like great examples of co-creation.
Exactly.
What was it about the partnership that made partnership better than trying to do it by yourself?
I think we strongly believe it has to be a collective effort, especially the topic of sustainability or reducing the carbon footprint. We believe it has to be a collective effort, and that's why when we announced this collaboration, we opened this. We might be the first one to launch those, but then it's open later on for all the industry players to join in this great cause and help collectively to minimize the carbon footprint.
Thank you. The last kind of thing that I want to ask about before we really directly hit more of the questions that are in the Q&A box is the special place of Asia. And Rachel, let me start with you and ask you how you see the role of Asia in kind of global innovation that's going to happen from now for the next few years.
Well, I think Asia is interesting because we've got probably the youngest demographic reaching, I'd say, middle income and even high income around the whole world, right? We've got, I'd say, in Southeast Asia, at the very least, your average age is 29 years old. My guess is, China, India is probably a little bit lower, or, it doesn't deviate too much from it. So I think, the consumers are pretty interesting. So given that the consumers are so young, we've adapted to the technology fast, easy. When we went to Myanmar a couple of years ago, I said this is interesting. So I was speaking to the Telenor guys, and he said, what's the interesting bit? When we first started and we came in, we gave everyone really lousy 2G phones. So when you buy a SIM card, it was $100, you get a 2G phone, right, to come with it. People were chucking the 2G phones away, and they were going to 3G phones very quickly because they said, what's the point of, just being, on the phone, right? It was really, going online and, having that online presence. And that was why people wanted the smartphone. And so, I think we've seen a leapfrog of technology instead of going through, what people would have thought, you go through a landline, you go through a mobile phone, it really is, we've gone to the smartphone. We've bypassed, laptops and desktops, and we are using the smartphones right now, right? And so, I think with Asia, we've seen, innovation is very different from the rest of the world. In China, there is WeChat. It's one platform. You get to buy things, your influence. It's an Instagram, it's a LinkedIn, it's a Facebook, it's an ordering platform. Everything is on one. We haven't seen, the Americans or the US companies having to do that. I think in China, innovation is a little different. Here we also see, very different innovation from the rest of the world. Typically, I think 5 years ago when I first came back, it was, Uber of Southeast Asia, LinkedIn of Southeast Asia, or what is it, Facebook of China. And I think that, that comparison between East and West is now significantly different, right? And so I think Asia would lead innovation more because, I think, culturally, we're very different. I think the things that we've embraced have also been very different. We've got a much younger consumer, and we also got a very different mindset into consumers, right? Also, I think additionally, I think this is uniquely in Southeast Asia, uniquely in Asia. We've got a lot of entrepreneurs still helming, the reins of their companies. So most founders are still chairman, or if they're not chairman, they're involved some way or another, dictating the policies of the companies. And so when you've got, a stubborn founder there who's used to doing businesses, how they did 30 to 40 years ago, it's a little different. But I think, we're very different from the West, right? Where I think if it makes dollar and cents and it hits their bottom line and increases their share price, most founders are very pragmatic with the conversation of innovation. So again, I think, we're different from multiple standpoints, but, I think the last point about how founders are still at the helm of their companies, and I think we're slowly seeing the transition into the second and third generation. I think that's where, change will, accelerate in the next couple of years.
Thanks. Real quick follow-up on the ESG question, and this is kind of a restatement of a question that came in from the audience. I'm curious, are your LPs sensitive to ESG issues and kind of really democratization of benefits of the startup companies? Because I think that, there is this sense that venture capital is all about making the winners win big, and so they make a lot of money and then everybody else is left behind. Especially the whole kind of democratization issue. Are you getting much dialogue with your LPs in that regard?
I've said we've had a lot of conversations with LPs, and quickly I've gone back to say, hey, if I invest in something that is ESG focused, and if it doesn't do well, are you able to accept the lower return? The answer is also no. So while everyone talks about, we haven't really seen that, correlate with the, potential lower. And to say that that's going to be returns, right? I'm also saying that, it's got to go both ways, like if we're going to be investing in the younger farmers, or, going down to the rural areas, are you going to accept a lower returns because of that? Or maybe not a lower returns, right? Are you going to be comfortable with a longer return period or digestion period, right? Because the reality of it is when we go down to the rurals, and we're touching, the lives of the guys who haven't had a smartphone, for example, it takes a little while to adapt to that technology. And so if you're okay with it, I think we're okay with that. And I think the conversation is, I think people are starting to realize that, hey, like investing doesn't take, a day, right? A change doesn't take a day or, 2 months or a year. It really is, a 5-year thing. And for us, we have a 10-year horizon and everything. Because the way we see it is like change happens overnight, but it happens slowly and it creeps in slowly, right? People change. And I think, we were not the same people that we were a year or 2 years ago, right? I think that's, a year or 2 years ago, I would be in Taiwan with everyone, having this conversation in person. And now we're all okay online and we're doing different time zones, for example. And I think, that conversation has changed. And I think people are a little bit, I'd say smarter, but more eloquent the way they invest, right? So the conversations have happened. I say it's not, a must. But again, like, the way we see it is as long as you do good, you'll do well. And so that's probably how we invest. And again, like, if we're going to invest in only, the guys that are going to be big, it's also not very fun. You want to back the little guy, you want to back, the Mark Zuckerberg who came out from college, right? That's more a fun story. So, I think that conversation has happened. And I think, again, like for us, we're backing young entrepreneurs, the average age of guys we've backed is under 35-year-olds, right? So you're really 30-year-olds coming in, you do a couple of years of work, you're coming in, you want to change the world. I think if with that lofty, worldly ambitions, those guys do well. And we like that. And, again, for us, it's, how do we make the world a better place?
Okay, thank you. Marcel, so special role for Asia, especially innovation that might involve open innovation with Asian startups. We had a question about open innovation at Giant. So let's kind of put the two together.
Well, I think speaking from the Giant perspective, my personal exposure to Giant, because I'm coming from the States, so I kind of do see that desire for open type innovation, very aggressive, fast moving, and how that might fit within the Giant ecosystem. I would say as a Asian originated company, Giant really has this kind of purity in terms of being grounded, to use Rachel's words, like pragmatic. That word actually pops up in our discussions a lot, and it's very high grit. And so when we're innovating and we're looking at innovation, there's this very intense focus on what problem are you solving and for whom, and who else are you causing problems for as a result. And so open innovation, like we do that on an exploratory basis, internally and externally, both with potential startups or existing supply chain partners. A lot of the times we bounce ideas with these partners. Now, these conversations can get a little bit more tricky because on the one hand, we do need to co-innovate with these guys to really bring a new concept to reality. On the other, that's value creation. And on the other hand, who's going to capture that value and how? And so it's a very interesting dual dynamic that's going on. And so there's a lot of layers going on in these types of projects and initiatives. But when they work, it's very exciting.
Agreed. Let's go to Gulshan. Gulshan, what's the special role of Asia, especially in innovation for Lululemon? Not so much as the markets themselves.
Richard, I would say, since I'm based in this part of the world for last 15 years, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Taipei, and working with, vendor base across Asia. I was reading somewhere, that collectivist societies excel at production while individualistic cultures nurture more invention, right? While I agree to some extent, but times are changing very fast in Asia. There is a collective and individual desire to be more innovative. To Marcel's point, there is a first order innovation that's spreading so fast in Asia. I think he used an excellent word called incremental innovation. And that's what we have been seeing in Asia for a while. Where Asia is excelling now off late is that they have been getting very techy as well. You get to see a lot of tech innovations coming out of Asia, which is to Marcel's second point is I think kind of getting disruptive as well. So we have very strong confidence, given our experience of dealing with Asian vendors. And an interesting anecdote there is our first ever vendor was Asian, and from Taiwan. And we are ever since a close partner till date. So we believe very strong about our vendor base in Asia and also the innovations, the future of innovations, coming out of Asia. I fully expect to see a major technological advance coming out of Asia, let's say in next 5-10 years, that will wow the world and lead to something that everyone in the world wants. So yeah, just reiterating how confident we are about our vendor base in Asia, and we feel so strong about the innovation coming out of Asia.
Okay, thank you. Quick question for everybody. This came from the questions. So what is the most exciting new technology in your particular industry or that you're looking at right now? And also, are there a set of must-have technologies that you really need? Let me go with Rachel first. As the investor in these, what is the most exciting thing you're seeing now, and what are the ones that you really got to be playing in?
For us, this is probably alternative protein, right? I think I've tried everything that you can think of. There is lobsters without shells. It's quite interesting. It comes in the form of mincemeat. There is eggless eggs. It comes in a form of a powder. That's interesting. It comes out. It's white. It's white. It's powderish, but it comes out like yellow scrambled eggs. And I'll send you. But it's actually pretty interesting, right? You get 90% of the same nutrient as an egg. So if you're vegetarian, for example, or you're looking for a different protein source, that's one way to go. Essentially, we're going from 7 billion people in the world. We're going to 10 billion people. We've got to find more sustainable ways of feeding the population. So we're investing a lot in alternative protein and alternative foods. And again, this is something, we feel very strongly about. You talk about ESG and sustainability. We think, by creating more sustainable food, we're able to, lower the impact. People talk about, flying and everything else, but really, we also don't think about what we can do on a day-to-day basis. Again, the food's, great quality. It's equal in nutrient. There's less impact to the world. And again, it's unfortunately is a little bit more expensive. So, I think we're solving that issue right now by investing a little bit more in R&D. But, for a crustacean company that we've invested in, it went from $10,000 per kilo to $1,500, and I think we're per kilo, and we're looking to move it to $50 per kilo. So the idea is obviously for crustacean cheaply, that alternative protein to the rest of the world. And again, one thing that's interesting is that we've realized that the shellfish allergies that a lot of people have, it's not just it's not really from the prawns or the lobsters. It's really to the shell. So if we eliminate, we want to have lobsters or prawns, right? And so I think that's probably the interesting that we're looking at. And again, there's lots of alternative proteins out there. It's a healthier version, so I urge everyone to try it.
Okay, a crustless crustacean. Okay.
Yeah. And eggless eggs.
So, Marcel, what's the really hot technology that excites you, and what kind of technologies do you see as must-have, kind of moving in the future for Giant?
Absolutely. I think right now the hot topic for the bicycle industry is e-bikes. I mean, the market growth rate for that type of product as a big bucket is just, you imagine the hockey stick, and it's that aggressive. And so that's very hot, and I know many people have reached out regarding that topic for collaborations, and I thank you for that. And it's really an exciting space because we generally see people coming in from three types of backgrounds. You have the motorcycle type of background coming into the e-bike space. You have the technology angle that's coming in, and you have the traditional bicycle industry players, and that's where we come from. And so it's a very fascinating development to see all different interpretations of, if I put some sort of motor on a bicycle or something that looks like a bicycle, what is that like? And so there are all shapes and forms of e-bikes that are out there, and we anticipate it to be this way for a little bit of time. But taking on the evolutionary next step sort of logic, what's the next must-have? Well, if you play out this prevalence of e-bikes, battery recycling, that's going to be a next step. And also, we talk about e-bikes in terms of emissions reducing. Well, are you really reducing emissions if you take into account the full product life cycle, including the usage as well, and end of life of the product? All of these things are, I think, going to be the logical next steps that we have to look at, which kind of ties into our focus on ESG now.
Those are great points. Gulshan, what do you see for your must-have technology, and what's really exciting now?
I would say, Richard, Lululemon as a company is all in, when it comes to innovation, and our sweet spot is creating versatile and stylish products that includes technical innovation, comfort, which is all about the science of feel. So some of you might have seen recently we introduced our media campaigns around feel. Because we strongly believe that anything that touches skin or that's next to the skin for our guest, should have a special feel about it. So back to the point, like technical innovation, comfort, and flexibility, which is all about movement. So any innovation which can bring this to the table, we are more than welcome, to talk about those. And also not to forget, if these innovations can be intertwined or can bring in a sustainability angle, I think that's definitely a win-win situation for both companies. Thank you.
Thank you. So everyone, I just want to give you a heads up. I have one more question I'm going to ask everybody. That means I'm not going to be able to get to a lot of the questions in the Q&A box, which are great questions. And we will follow up and they have all been considered, trying to keep some measure of cohesiveness in the order of topics. Last thing, though, is none of the three of you mentioned the other big buzzword that's in innovation right now, and that's digital transformation. And I'm kind of curious, why not? And what is digital transformation to your company? The 25 words or less answer. Gulshan?
Definitely, and thanks for voicing this out. I mean, not to be missed for sure. Digital is such a strong focus area, and COVID has just accelerated, the need to kind of invest more into that space, because we have seen the benefits last year and this year as well. Not that we don't believe strongly about our stores, because we still believe very strong about experiential experience that our guests feel when they walk into our stores. But digital is something that we continue to expand. And if you look at our power of three, that's the whole strategy of next 5-year expansion. One of the power of three pillars is omni guest experience, and digital is at the forefront of that for sure.
Okay. Marcel, what about Giant? Digital transformation.
That is certainly a very big word here at Giant. We've been talking about it for the previous several years and really executing on elements of it. Within the bicycle industry, and really speaking for Giant, digital transformation has been happening bit by bit. From a product perspective, we see digital transformation, these types of IoT devices that are attached to our products. We see those as ways to augment, to expand the experience of cycling. And that's anywhere from the U-bike system all the way to our e-bikes and everything in between. We have, forayed into power meters that really analyzes every cyclist, what's your power output. That's derived from the elite athletes. That's now democratized to anyone. And so we position these types of technology and insight as a service to improve on your cycling experience. That's one way, one concrete way in which we look at and think about the digital transformation. Now on the operations side, in terms of the sales and distribution, I think I would like to echo Gulshan's approach about this dual channel and dual nature of consumer engagement. It's not online replacing offline. Internally, we have this lingo called O+O, online plus offline, how they complement each other. And so again, this is a very deliberate choice for us. And finally, of course, in the manufacturing side of things, Richard, you mentioned a little bit earlier about Industry 4.0, the digitization of production. That's also evolving in our side as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So with all of this digitalization happening everywhere and this kind of thing, Rachel, what is your attitude toward the term digital transformation, and how does it impact how you do investing?
I think it's a necessity. I've had multiple conversations with government officials, especially in Malaysia, over the last year and a half or so. We've seen, SMEs or small medium businesses really struggle over the 1.5 years, where they aren't able to deliver their goods to consumers. So the conversation, and I think I never really understood that, because we've always invested in digital transformation. So not being able to deliver goods is like it's basic 1.0, right? That's you should be on e-commerce anyway. You should be on your smartphone. You should be on you should be able to work from home anytime you want, because you've got a mobile and you've got your desktop or your laptop, right? So I never really understood that conversation until really this 1.5 years, where people are just not equipped for that transformation. There's a lot of there's a lot of good intentions, but nobody really invested in it. And so, we've gone around hopping to say hey, I don't really understand why, we're having a slump of economy, when the rest of our portfolios are doing well. But again, I think it was a very simplistic way of thinking about it. We've always invested in, companies that were disrupting, existing ways of doing businesses. So, when COVID hit, for example, the guys that, we've invested in, we've typically triple or quadruple in terms of revenues. So we're like, hey, COVID's great, right? Because things have been doing really well. But again, I think that's not, a reflection of the broader economy. And I think because of that, I think now, more corporates have really embraced the word digital transformation. They've allowed people to work from home, for example. I think that's probably, the most useful thing. It's probably not safe anymore to just go out in big batches. So, why don't we look at this flexible, work from home structure and, put it a little bit, more permanent At the same time, when we do due diligence, typically, I used to fly out every week, right? So I haven't been out of the country since January last year to do diligence. And now everything is online. It's really more efficient. I get more things done in a day, as I would have typically had in the past. And then I think the way that we have to move forward from our traditional economies it's happening, right? We can't rely on what we've done in the past, and I think that's basically it.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks to our three panelists who have demonstrated how innovation is all about keeping up with changing times. Mm-hmm. And moving ahead, creating new value, creating better experiences. All the inventions are the tools and only the tools. So thanks to everybody for being part of the program. Let me turn over the microphone now to Elisa, and if you would help wrap us up.
Thank you, Richard, and also Rachel, Marcel, and Gulshan. What a panel and incredible discussion. And I have to say, man, because, I got to keep an eye on what's going on in the chat room. What an incredible crowd as well. Thank you so much for spending either your evening or morning or afternoon with us. I really, really appreciate that. I'm sorry that because of the time, we cannot go through all of these incredible and wonderful questions in Q&A. But what we will promise is that we're going to collect them and basically send the copies to all of our speakers so they will get to know who asked what. And then if you were to reach out to them afterwards, hopefully this is just the beginning of a lot of meaningful conversations and also connections to come, not only among the speakers, between the speakers and you, and hopefully you have also connected with someone from the audience just now as well. And remember that the recaps and also video replays of this session and also our previous sessions are available on our social media channels. So make sure to check out DIGITIMES and Anchor Taiwan through YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and so on and so forth if you want to watch the replay and do your review. So next month, we're going to talk about how global unicorns leverage Asia from zero to exit. You might be familiar with companies or products like Amazon Ring, Fitbit, Peloton, Tonal, or Vizio. How did they make it from a tiny early stage startups, especially when it comes to navigating the complication with the supply chains and hardware production? Who was the early believer for them, and what kind of role did Asia play behind the scene back then? You will see the QR code for RSVP at the end, which you can scan to join us next month. Again, with that, I'm so happy to have this honor to bring all of you together. Thank you for joining us. Greetings from Taipei, and we hope to see you again very soon. Have a nice one. Bye-bye.